What happens when Hollywood's brightest faces wander into the shadows, where love is a weapon and loyalty is bought in cash and fear? Behind champagne flutes and camera flashes, secret romances bloomed in back rooms and smoky suites affairs that promised protection, power, and a thrill no studio could script. Some stars believed they were untouchable. Others understood too late that every whisper had a price. These are the stories the spotlight could not cleanse, passions nurtured in the underworld, promises sealed in the dark, and endings written in blood or silence. How many legends kept their hearts alive by holding hands with danger, and how many were swallowed by it? 20. Lana Turner. Lana Turner floated through the 40s and 50s like a vision. Mink on her shoulders, danger at her heels, a studio-crafted dream with a heartbeat that wanted more than adoration. What she found was Johnny Stompanato, the handsome enforcer whose smile promised protection and whose temper announced the truth. He did not belong to Hollywood. He belonged to power, the kind enforced by fists, and the men who answered to Mickey Cohen. At first it felt intoxicating. The jealous phone calls, the velvet apologies, the flowers arriving before dawn, all of it framed as love, as proof that a goddess could be claimed by someone unafraid of gods. But control tightened. Friends disappeared. Rooms grew smaller. Even the mirror seemed to hesitate before returning her gaze. The price of being adored by a man of the underworld was to live on a clock set by his suspicions. Spring came to Beverly Hills with nerves stretched thin. A fight erupted, the kind that starts with a hiss and ends with a scream. What happened next ripped the glitter from the walls. Lana's teenage daughter stepped between them, a flash of steel, then silence heavy enough to bend the floorboards. A coroner's verdict would call it self-defense. Headlines would call it everything else. The aftermath turned a family into a spectacle. Courtroom sketches replaced studio stills. Agents spoke in whispers. Reporters camped on the lawn like crows. Lana kept breathing, kept working, but the air had changed. The town that once crowned her now looked away when she entered the room. In private, friends said she understood the lesson too well. The underworld does not romance, it recruits. Lana Turner survived, but the myth did not. What remained was a warning stamped on the golden age itself that glamour cannot bargain with violence, and that even a star can wake to find the script rewritten by men from the shadows. Ninetane, Jane Mansfield. Jane Mansfield was never meant to fade quietly into the background. She was Hollywood's loudest siren, a pink tornado of laughter, champagne, and scandal. Her every move demanded attention, and she loved it. Yet somewhere along the way, the bright lights of the strip led her into a darkness she couldn't charm her way out of. When Jane fell for Sam Brody, a volatile attorney with deep Mafia connections, it felt like another whirlwind romance, wild, obsessive, and doomed. Brody wasn't just possessive, he was dangerous. He introduced her to the men who ran Las Vegas from behind the tables, men whose smiles never reached their eyes. Jane, chasing excitement and rebellion, didn't flinch. She told friends she could handle him, that love wasn't supposed to be safe. But the danger grew. Friends recalled bruises hidden under diamonds and nights filled with shouting behind locked hotel doors. And then, in the summer of 1967, came the crash. A foggy Louisiana highway, a car moving too fast, and a sudden collision that left nothing but twisted metal and unanswered questions. Jane was gone before sunrise. The tabloids screamed tragedy, but the whispers went deeper. Some said Brody's debts had followed them onto that road, that the crash wasn't fate, it was a warning. Others swore she had become collateral in a war between the mob and the men who thought they could outsmart it. Jane Mansfield's death became legend, equal parts horror and heartbreak. The pink convertibles, the playful smile, the curves that made America blush, all buried beneath the weight of a single truth. She loved dangerously, and the underworld never lets go of what it touches. 18. Virginia Hill. Virginia Hill wasn't just a woman who flirted with danger. She lived inside it. Long before Hollywood tried to tell her story, she had already written her own script, one filled with money, power, and blood. They called her the Queen of the Mob. And unlike most women on this list, she didn't stumble into the Mafia's world, she built a home there. Born into poverty, Virginia clawed her way into high society, using charm sharper than any knife. She worked her way through the speakeasies and gambling dens of Chicago until she met Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, the man who would make her both famous and cursed. Bugsy wasn't just another gangster. He was vision and violence stitched together in a single suit. He fell for Virginia instantly, and she for him, though what bound them was less love and more combustion. Together, they became the most glamorous couple in organized crime, the Hollywood version of Bonnie and Clyde. Siegel funded the Flamingo Hotel, the first jewel of Las Vegas, while Virginia played hostess, courtesan, and courier all at once. She ferried millions in mob money across borders, wearing designer gowns that hid ledgers instead of jewels. But the Mafia doesn't tolerate mistakes. When the Flamingo lost money, Siegel's partners blamed him. In the summer of 1947, he was gunned down in his Beverly Hills home, 9 bullets, one of them through his eye. Hours later, Mafia lieutenants walked into the Flamingo and quietly took control. Virginia fled to Europe, claiming innocence, but no one in America believed her. To the FBI, she was a spy in heels. To the mob, she was a liability who knew too much. And when she was later found dead in Austria hanging from a tree, investigators called it suicide. But to everyone who ever crossed her path, the message was clearer. Virginia Hill didn't just love a gangster, she became one of them. 17. Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor was Hollywood's most intoxicating creation. Violet eyes, scandalous loves, and a life so extravagant, it seemed immune to consequence. She wasn't just an actress, she was a global obsession. Yet beneath the diamonds and perfume, there were whispers that the world's most glamorous woman had wandered too close to men who ruled by intimidation rather than fame, men from the Mafia's inner circle. During the glittering chaos of the 1950s and 60s, Taylor was a fixture in Las Vegas, the mob's playground dressed up as paradise. She and Richard Burton gambled freely at casinos run by the very people the FBI spent decades trying to bring down. The couple's wild spending and public fights made them irresistible tabloid fodder, but to mobsters, they were something else: high-value guests whose presence gave legitimacy to their empire. Rumors spread that Elizabeth had developed private friendships with casino owners and businessmen whose fortunes were built on rackets and extortion. Some claimed she was offered protection when her personal life turned turbulent. Others suggested she was drawn to the magnetic danger of men whose power didn't rely on cameras or applause. Hollywood tried to keep its distance, but Vegas never forgot her name or her debts. Though no photograph ever exposed her alongside a mob boss, insiders insisted that Elizabeth's charm and impulsiveness made her the kind of woman who could walk into any room and leave even the most dangerous man captivated. It was this blend of fearlessness and vulnerability that fueled her legend and her risk. Elizabeth Taylor survived where others fell. She turned scandal into spectacle and heartbreak into headlines. But behind the diamonds and Oscar statues, her story reminds us that even Hollywood royalty could not resist the seductive pull of power, and that the Mafia's shadow lingered wherever beauty and money met. 16. Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner was the kind of woman Hollywood couldn't contain: wild, magnetic, and breathtaking in a way that felt almost dangerous. She once said, "I have never been afraid of trouble," and she lived those words to the letter. Her beauty opened every door, and her defiance kicked down the rest. But the same fearlessness that made her a legend also led her into circles filled with men whose power was built not on fame, but on fear, the world of the Mafia. By the late 1940s, Ava's career was exploding. She was newly famous, newly single, and utterly intoxicating. She moved through nightclubs in New York, Havana, and Rome like a storm wrapped in silk, drawing the attention of gangsters, gamblers, and film producers alike. In Havana, where the mob ruled every casino, every hotel, every breath of nightlife, She was reportedly courted by men connected to the Italian underworld, men who promised her the world in exchange for her company. Some said Ava was protected by the Mafia, her name powerful enough to earn their respect. Others whispered that she was more than just a guest in their world, that her fiery romances with musicians and politicians blurred into something far more dangerous. Her attraction to chaos was no secret. She called it the only thing that feels alive. Hollywood's elite adored her, but the tabloids thrived on her recklessness. Stories of her affairs with bullfighters, actors, and mysterious European men kept her name in print even when her films didn't. Yet behind the gossip was a truth few could ignore. Ava Gardner was a woman drawn to intensity, no matter the cost. For Ava, danger was never a warning, it was a thrill. And whether the Mafia truly claimed a piece of her heart or not, she danced close enough to their world to leave a mark. 15. Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth was the dream that every man in the 1940s wanted to touch but never could. On screen she was fire and silk, a woman who could make the world stop with a glance. They called her the Love Goddess, a title she wore like perfume, intoxicating and impossible to escape. Yet behind that divine image was a woman drawn to men who lived by darker rules, men whose power came not from Hollywood, but from the Mafia's empire of smoke and secrets. At the height of her fame, Rita was constantly surrounded by admirers, movie moguls, princes, and powerful men who wanted to own a piece of her light. Among them, according to Hollywood insiders, were figures tied to organized crime who ruled the casinos and nightclubs where she performed and partied. They treated her like a prize, flaunting her beauty as a symbol of power. To the public, she was a goddess. To the underworld, she was a trophy. Her marriages were legendary and chaotic, from Orson Welles to Prince Ali Khan, but the real stories were whispered in the shadows, tales of private dinners, coded phone calls, and affairs that blurred the line between love and manipulation. Friends later said Rita was looking for protection, someone strong enough to guard her from the men who wanted to use her. Ironically, the ones she chose may have been the most dangerous of all. The irony of Rita Hayworth's life was brutal. Adored by millions, yet never safe from the men who claimed to love her. By the time her fame began to fade, the goddess of desire had become a symbol of heartbreak, a woman who gave the world passion and received only possession in return. Even now, her story lingers like a whisper from another age, where the Mafia courted movie stars and Hollywood mistook danger for love. 14. Judy Garland. Judy Garland was America's sweetheart, a voice that could shatter hearts and a smile that made the world believe in innocence. But behind the curtain, her life was a battlefield of pills, exhaustion, and endless betrayal. By the time she reached adulthood, the girl who had sung Somewhere Over the Rainbow was already drowning in darkness. And in that darkness, she crossed paths with men who lived outside the law, men who offered comfort with one hand and control with the other. When Hollywood abandoned her, Judy turned to the nightclub circuit, performing in smoky lounges and Las Vegas casinos run by the mob. There, surrounded by gamblers, hustlers, and gangsters in tailored suits, she became both a star attraction and a fragile soul the Mafia could not resist. Rumors spread that she formed intimate relationships with men tied to organized crime, men who offered her loans, protection, and affection when no one else would. Her friends called it survival, not scandal. Judy was tired, broke, and lonely, and the underworld knew how to make broken people feel safe until they weren't. The same men who whispered promises of stability also controlled every stage she sang on, every paycheck she earned. The woman who once embodied innocence now performed for audiences filled with mob bosses and enforcers who clapped a little too loud. By the time she died in 1969, Judy Garland was only 47, her brilliance dimmed by years of exploitation and addiction. The tabloids called it tragedy, but those who knew her saw something crueler, a woman who gave everything to her art and was left defenseless in a world where kindness had a price tag. Her life remains one of Hollywood's greatest paradoxes, the girl who gave the world light, only to be consumed by the shadows that hid behind its applause. 13. Jean Harlow. Jean Harlow was Hollywood's first bombshell, the platinum-haired dream who invented the very idea of screen seduction. She arrived in the early 1930s like a shockwave, a woman who smiled through scandal and turned sin into art. But beneath the diamonds and studio lights, there were stories that Harlow's success wasn't born solely from talent or timing. Whispers said she had powerful friends, men who didn't work for the studios, but for the mob. Her life was drenched in both glamour and tragedy. Married 3 times before she was 30, she seemed to attract chaos the way others attracted fame. The most haunting episode came in 1932, when her husband, producer Paul Byrne, was found dead from a gunshot wound in their Beverly Hills home. The studio called it suicide. The police closed the case, but Hollywood insiders weren't convinced. Rumors swirled that Byrne's death was tied to gambling debts and the underworld, and that Jean had been shielded from scandal by men who didn't want the truth to surface. She continued to sparkle in front of the cameras, playing the roles of the bold and the untouchable, but behind the scenes, her world was shrinking. Harlow was said to frequent nightclubs where mobsters mixed with stars, and some claimed her fame gave protection to people who needed it most, the men who financed movies with blood money. Whether she knew it or not, her name had become a currency traded in dangerous places. When Jean Harlow died suddenly at 26, the official cause was kidney failure. But for a public raised on rumors, it was just another mystery in a life that glittered too brightly to be natural. To this day, her legend flickers like the films she left behind, luminous, cursed, and forever entangled in the shadows of men who made their fortunes in fear. 12. Mae West. Mae West didn't just break the rules of Hollywood, she rewrote them. With her razor wit, provocative curves, and purring one-liners, she became the first true queen of controversy. While other actresses begged for studio approval, Mae built an empire by teasing censorship itself. But her boldness didn't just scandalize the public, it drew the attention of men who admired power, the same kind of power the Mafia wielded. In the 1930s, when Prohibition had turned nightclubs into war zones of whiskey and whispers, Mae thrived in the chaos. She knew everyone worth knowing, from Broadway producers to bootleggers, and she made no effort to hide it. She was photographed in mob-owned clubs, dining with men whose names terrified politicians. Insiders said she found their company amusing and their loyalty useful. "I only like men who make me laugh," she once said. "The good ones are always bad." Rumor had it that certain mobsters helped finance her stage shows when the censors tried to silence her. Others claimed she had lovers in the underworld who ensured no one dared threaten her success. Whether those stories were truth or exaggeration, Mae encouraged them. She understood the press better than any studio boss. Every scandal was free publicity. Every rumor made her immortal. By the time she reached old age, Mae West had become a legend, untouchable, unbreakable, and still draped in diamonds. While her peers were ruined by gossip, she danced through it, laughing all the way to the bank. Mae never admitted to loving a gangster, but she never denied it either. And maybe that was her greatest performance, blurring the line between fact and fantasy so perfectly that even the Mafia couldn't tell where the act ended and the woman began. 11. Zsa Zsa Gabor. Zsa Zsa Gabor didn't chase fame, she married it, molded it, and then wore it like a diamond crown. A Hungarian beauty with 9 marriages, an acid tongue, and a talent for turning scandal into sparkle, she was one of the first women to turn her personal life into a performance. But the further she climbed into the glittering world of casinos, champagne, and power, the closer she found herself to men whose money came with menace, the Mafia. By the 1950s, Zsa Zsa had become a fixture in Las Vegas, the Mafia's favorite playground dressed in neon. She mingled with casino owners, entertainers, and men whose tailored suits couldn't hide their criminal roots. Insiders claimed that she dated one of the mob's top gambling financiers, a man who treated her like royalty until she realized royalty had rules, and breaking them could cost her everything. Her presence was irresistible to the underworld. The mob loved beautiful women who carried fame like perfume, and Zaza loved the attention. Her charm could disarm anyone. Her wit could humiliate them. Reporters loved her boldness, but FBI memos quietly noted her name alongside men under investigation for racketeering. Still, she never appeared in courtrooms or scandals directly. She was too smart for that. For Zaza, danger was part of the show. She played her lovers like she played the cameras, never giving away the truth. When asked years later about her rumored Mafia ties, she laughed it off and said, "Darling, I only dated rich men. I didn't check how they made it." Behind that smile was the brilliance of survival. Zaza Gabor turned her life into legend by mastering the oldest Hollywood secret. As long as people are watching, you can hide anything in plain sight. 10. Phyllis McGuire. Phyllis McGuire looked like the definition of innocence: soft curls, perfect posture, and a voice that floated like silk through America's living rooms. As one-third of the famous McGuire sisters, she sold purity and patriotism to a post-war generation desperate to believe in good girls. But what the public never imagined was that behind the wholesome smile was a love story straight out of a mob confession. Her lover was Sam Giancana, the Chicago kingpin, whose empire stretched from Vegas casinos to the White House. He was a man of violence and power, and yet he adored Phyllis like she was his last prayer. They met in the glow of Vegas nightlife, where mobsters ruled the tables and showgirls sang for men who could buy anything. When the two appeared together, it was more than gossip, it was danger made glamorous. FBI files documented their affair in chilling detail. Phone taps, secret surveillance, even transcripts of love letters read aloud by agents in court. To the Bureau, she wasn't just a singer, she was evidence. To Giancana, she was a treasure to be protected, no matter the cost. He gave her diamonds, mansions, and a taste of a life most women could only dream of, but one built on blood. The relationship nearly destroyed her career. Sponsors pulled out, networks distanced themselves, and her sisters begged her to end it. But Phyllis refused. "You can't help who you love," she said later, and maybe she believed that. When Giancana was murdered in his Chicago home in 1975, Phyllis never spoke publicly about him again, yet she never denied him either. In a world where even presidents feared his name, she had loved him openly and survived. That alone made her story one of the most extraordinary scandals Hollywood and the Mafia ever shared. 9. Ann Dvorak. Ann Dvorak was never the obedient kind of star Hollywood liked to keep. With her sculpted face, sharp mind, and quiet defiance, she belonged to the rare breed of actresses who valued freedom more than fame. In the 1930s, while others played by studio rules, Ann walked away from them and straight into the arms of danger. She came from a Hollywood family, raised among lights and scripts, yet she spent her life running from control. She fought studio contracts, rejected publicity stunts, and disappeared for months at a time. It was during those vanishings in smoky bars and foreign ports that her path allegedly crossed with men who lived outside the law. Some said she fell for a gambler with mob connections. Others believed she was protected by underworld patrons who admired her rebellion. Ann's independence came at a cost. Studios labeled her difficult, and whispers about her associations followed every new project. Hollywood didn't forgive women who played by their own rules, especially ones who refused to explain their private lives. Her career dimmed, and when the spotlight faded, the rumors only grew louder. Stories of love affairs with men who operated casinos, smuggled fortunes, and made their enemies disappear. She was never caught in a scandal, never photographed with a known mobster, but that was part of her mystery. Ann Dvorak carried the quiet aura of someone who had seen too much and learned to keep her secrets locked behind her smile. By the time she retired, her films were already being rediscovered as lost classics, her beauty frozen in black and white. To the studios, she was a rebel who vanished. To history, she became something rarer, a woman who defied Hollywood, courted danger, and walked away without leaving a trace of fear. 8. Marilyn Maxwell. Marilyn Maxwell was the kind of woman who could light up a stage with one note. Blonde, bold, and effortlessly charming, she was a fixture in the 1940s entertainment scene, singing for soldiers, starring in comedies, and stealing hearts from coast to coast. But behind the patriotic smile and sweet voice lay a private world laced with danger. Marilyn was no stranger to powerful men, and some of those men moved in the shadows of organized crime. Her career was built in nightclubs, smoky rooms where laughter was loud, the whiskey stronger than the truth, and the Mafia owned every light bulb in the ceiling. Those were the stages where she became famous, and where she allegedly met her most dangerous admirers. Reports from the time linked her to nightclub owners and investors with deep mob ties, men who could turn her career from obscurity to stardom with a single favor or ruin her with one phone call. Marilyn never publicly admitted to any connection with the underworld, but Hollywood insiders whispered that she enjoyed the thrill of danger. She was said to be drawn to men who lived recklessly, the ones who carried both guns and charm in equal measure. Her charisma made her irresistible, even to those who ruled through intimidation. As her fame waned in the 1950s, so did her luck. Her health declined, her finances crumbled, and the glamorous stages that once adored her became silent. When she died suddenly in 1972, alone in her Beverly Hills home, fans mourned the loss of another forgotten voice from Hollywood's golden age. Yet those who knew her best said the real tragedy wasn't how she died, it was the company she kept. Marilyn Maxwell had spent her life singing for America's heroes, but behind the curtain, her applause sometimes came from the men the heroes were fighting against. 7. Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge was beauty and bravery wrapped into one. The first black woman to be nominated for an Oscar, she shattered barriers that had stood since the dawn of Hollywood. On screen, she was elegance, a goddess in motion. Off-screen, she was a woman fighting a system built to break her. And somewhere between triumph and tragedy, she found herself standing too close to the men who ran the darker half of show business, the Mafia. By the mid-1950s, Dorothy's career was soaring, but the studios refused to give her roles worthy of her talent. The only places that welcomed her without prejudice were the nightclubs and casinos of Las Vegas, temples of sin and glamour ruled by mobsters in silk suits. She sang to packed audiences, her voice gliding over piano notes, while men with guns tucked under their jackets watched from the back tables. Insiders whispered that Dorothy fell for one of those men, a casino operator connected to the mob who promised to protect her from the cruelty of Hollywood. He offered her money, security, and the illusion of control. But love with the Mafia never came without a cost. Friends said she began to change, more anxious, more secretive, haunted by debts and threats she never dared explain. Her fall was fast and merciless. By the early 60s, the work had dried up, the money was gone, and she was left chasing performances in the same clubs that had once worshipped her. When she died in 1965, the autopsy called it an overdose. The gossip called it revenge. Dorothy Dandridge's story wasn't just about racism or fame, it was about survival in a world where the applause came from men who decided who lived to take the next bow. 6. Joan Collins. Joan Collins was born for the spotlight. With her sharp cheekbones, cutting wit, and unapologetic ambition, she was the kind of woman Hollywood both adored and feared. Long before she became television's ultimate vixen on Dynasty, Joan was already learning that the world of fame ran on secrets, and that some of those secrets wore Italian suits and carried revolvers. In the 1950s, a young Collins arrived in Los Angeles with the poise of royalty and the hunger of a survivor. She charmed producers, won roles, and collected admirers like trophies. Among them, according to Hollywood gossip, was a powerful man whose fortune was rooted not in film but in organized crime. He showered her with gifts, invitations, and promises whispered over champagne. To an outsider, it looked like romance. To insiders, it looked like a warning. Hollywood's golden age was already intertwined with the Mafia. The mob owned the clubs, funded the films, and decided who sang where and who didn't. For an actress as magnetic as Joan, attention was inevitable. She later hinted that she'd been pursued by dangerous men during her early years in America, men she politely declined, but who never quite stopped circling. Unlike many of her peers, Joan Collins was too sharp to get caught. She learned quickly that beauty could be armor, and that survival in Hollywood meant smiling through discomfort while remembering who was in the room. She built her career on control over her image, her lovers, and her narrative, something no gangster could ever truly take from her. Decades later, as Alexis Carrington, she would play the kind of woman she once feared becoming, ruthless, untouchable, and forever in charge. Joan Collins escaped the Mafia's grasp, not by running but by outsmarting it. Five. Sophia Loren. Sophia Loren was more than an actress, she was a national treasure. Born from the ruins of post-war Italy, she rose to become the embodiment of beauty, grace, and strength. But her rise was not just the story of cinema, it was also the story of a country rebuilding itself in the shadows of corruption and crime. And as Loren ascended to fame, the Mafia watched with fascination. Italy in the 1950s was a land where film producers, politicians, and crime bosses often sat at the same tables. The Cosa Nostra didn't just control villages in Sicily, it reached deep into Rome's studios and financiers. Sophia's stunning rise from a poor Neapolitan girl to an international icon was so extraordinary that many wondered if someone powerful had cleared her path. Whispers followed her from Naples to Cinecittà, that a silent patron had protected her, perhaps even loved her. Sophia never confirmed the rumors, but she didn't have to. Her magnetism drew every kind of man, actors, aristocrats, and underworld figures alike. Photographs from the era show her at events surrounded by moguls whose wealth couldn't be traced to anything honest. She smiled through it all, unbothered, poised like a queen among wolves. When pressed by reporters, Loren once replied, "In Italy, everyone knows everyone." It was the perfect answer, elegant, evasive, and true. Whether her connection to the Mafia was real or imagined, it only deepened her allure. Sophia Loren endured when many of her contemporaries faded, transcending scandal and suspicion to become an icon of integrity. But behind the legend lies a question no one has ever answered. Did she charm her way past the Mafia's grasp, or simply learn how to dance with it gracefully? 4. Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton was Hollywood's cautionary tale, a woman so beautiful she could have owned the world, and so reckless she burned it down instead. In the late 1940s, she was the kind of blonde producers dreamed of, electric, defiant, and dangerously alive. But fame wasn't enough for Barbara. She wanted passion, chaos, and men who could match her fire, even if those men came from the darkest corners of power. Her career began with promise, but quickly spiraled into scandal. Her love life read like a police report, movie stars, gangsters, and hustlers, all orbiting her like moths to a flame. The most infamous of her affairs was with Tom Neal, a brooding actor known for his temper and his ties to mob-connected circles. Their relationship ended in a brutal fight that left another actor, Franchot Tone, hospitalized and Barbara's reputation in ruins. From that moment, she was radioactive. Hollywood studios turned away, and Barbara drifted into the smoky world of nightclub acts and small-time hustles, a world the Mafia ran with a velvet fist. Insiders whispered that she fell in with men who promised protection and easy money, but instead trapped her in a cycle of dependency. The mob didn't need her fame, they needed her desperation. By the early 1950s, the goddess had become a ghost. She was arrested for fraud, photographed drunk on sidewalks, her once glamorous face unrecognizable. When she died at 39, broke and forgotten, the tabloids called her a fallen star. But those who remembered her knew better. Barbara Payton wasn't destroyed by Hollywood alone, she was seduced by a darker empire that offered love and delivered ruin. Her story wasn't just about scandal. It was about what happens when the Mafia finds someone too wild to control and too beautiful to let go. 3. Kim Novak. Kim Novak was the kind of beauty that made silence fall in a crowded room. Her porcelain face and haunted eyes defined the look of mid-century Hollywood, cool, remote, untouchable. On-screen, she was the mystery every man wanted to solve. Off-screen, she became one herself. Because behind her calm voice and shy smile, Kim Novak was linked to some of the most dangerous men in America, the ones who didn't need cameras to feel powerful. At the height of her fame, Novak was Columbia Pictures' prized possession, molded and managed by studio executives who treated her like glass. But even glass can crack under pressure. She rebelled against control, seeking freedom in a world far more dangerous than Hollywood's boardrooms, the glittering casinos, and smoky lounges of Las Vegas. That was where she met Frank Sinatra, and through him allegedly crossed into the orbit of the Mafia. Sinatra was the bridge between show business and the underworld, adored by presidents, protected by mob bosses. When Novak began appearing by his side, studio executives panicked. Rumors spread that she had caught the attention of a Chicago mob lieutenant, a man who viewed her as both a prize and a possession. Whispers of threats and secret meetings filled gossip columns, and suddenly, her career seemed to teeter on an invisible edge. Kim Novak never confirmed any of it. She retreated from fame, traded premieres for privacy, and let time blur the scandal into legend. But the questions never faded. Was she a victim of Hollywood's cruelty, or of the Mafia's obsession? In the end, Novak became what every great mystery must be: unknowable. And maybe that's why her image endures, a vision of grace forever framed by danger, proof that in Hollywood, the line between love and power is always drawn in shadows. 2. Sharon Tate. Sharon Tate was the embodiment of light, the California dream made flesh. With her soft voice, golden hair, and effortless charm, she seemed untouched by the darkness that always lingered behind Hollywood's glamour. But the truth is, even the brightest stars cast shadows. And before her life was stolen in one of the most shocking crimes in American history, there were whispers that Sharon had wandered too close to the world. No one dared speak about the Mafia's hidden empire in Los Angeles. During the swinging 60s, Tate's beauty made her a fixture at Hollywood's most exclusive parties, the kind attended by film producers, rock stars, and men whose wealth came from somewhere deeper than the movie business. Roman Polanski's young bride moved in circles where money flowed freely, and so did drugs, secrets, and danger. Some said she had unknowingly mingled with men connected to organized crime, the same figures who financed private clubs and production deals behind the scenes. After her murder in 1969, the world blamed Charles Manson and his cult, and rightly so. But conspiracy theories took root almost instantly. Some claimed her death wasn't random at all, that it was a message from powerful people in the underworld who wanted to silence someone or settle a debt. None of it was ever proven, but in a city built on illusion, rumor often outlives truth. What made Sharon's story unbearable was how violently innocence collided with corruption. She had been the kind of woman Hollywood promised would live forever, young, radiant, and in love. Instead, she became a ghost that haunted every mansion and studio lot. Sharon Tate's tragedy didn't just mark the end of an era, it reminded Hollywood and the world that even angels can fall when they fly too close to the fire. 1. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was more than Hollywood's golden girl. She was Hollywood. The smile, the walk, the shimmering vulnerability, no one embodied fame like she did. But the same light that made her irresistible also drew the darkest men toward her. Behind the breathy laugh and champagne glamour was a woman surrounded by power, politics, and the Mafia's unseen hand. Her name will forever be tied to President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert. Yet behind that famous triangle ran another thread, one that led straight to Chicago's underworld. The man in question, Sam Giancana, the mob boss whose influence stretched from Las Vegas to Washington. Rumor had it, Giancana and Monroe shared more than parties with Sinatra. They shared secrets, the kind that could ruin presidencies and end lives. Those who knew Marilyn in her final months described her as anxious, paranoid, and restless. She spoke of being followed, of phones that clicked when no one was there. Her relationships with powerful men had blurred into something dangerous. She wasn't just a lover, she had become a liability. On an August night in 1962, Marilyn was found dead in her Brentwood home, a phone in her hand, a bottle of pills nearby. The official story said overdose, but the world has never stopped asking, who wanted her silent? The Kennedys, the Mafia, or both? To her fans, she was beauty and innocence. To the men who surrounded her, she was information wrapped in diamonds. Whether she died by her own hand or someone else's, Marilyn Monroe's end marked the collision of Hollywood's dream and America's dirtiest secrets. She remains the ultimate paradox, adored by millions, destroyed by power. And in that paradox lies the most dangerous love story of all, the one between a goddess and the underworld that worshipped her. Behind the velvet curtains of Hollywood's golden age, love was never innocent. Every whisper of passion hid a transaction. Every embrace concealed a secret. For some of these stars, the Mafia offered protection. For others, it offered destruction. But all of them paid in silence, in fear, or in blood. The studios told us these women were angels. The tabloids told us they were sinners. The truth lived somewhere in between, in the quiet phone calls, the late-night deals, and the names erased from the guest lists of men who ruled both movies and crime. Fame promised them immortality, but the underworld promised them something else, a kind of love that could never exist in daylight. Hollywood was built on illusion, but these affairs were painfully real. And long after the lights dimmed and the reels stopped turning, one question still lingers in the smoke. How many of Hollywood's greatest loves were never romances at all, but warnings disguised as desire?